Hey, what's going on YouTube? Today we're going to talk about priming 223 brass and why I think bench priming is one of the best methods to do that. We're also going to talk about the Lee Auto Bench Prime, why I think this is a really great tool, so stick around. And hey, if you're new to the channel and you're looking for information, tutorials on how to reload 223 or reloading in general, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring that little bell so you get notifications when we put out new videos. We're going to talk about all the components of what you need to kind of get set up and get going. And then as we kind of go through, I'll explain the process and I'll explain really what I think the value of priming in this manner really is. Right off the bat, we'll talk about the Lee Auto Bench Prime. As I mentioned before, it's a very good tool, very good setup. When you get the press itself, you'll get the press, you'll get a primer holder, just one, and it's universal. It works for both large and small primers. You'll get two priming dispensers or priming apparatus. I don't know what the hell they call these things, but you get two of these. One's for small primers and the other is for large. Today we'll be using the small primers for 223. Then in addition to that, you're going to need some priming tool shell holders. These are also Lee. So it doesn't come with any of the shell holders. I'm not really sure why they don't package that together. I don't think it would be too hard, but I guess if you already had these, you wouldn't want to buy them additionally. But you'll get a set of shell holders when you buy this kit. The one that we are going to use today is actually shell holder number 4. All right, and I'm fairly certain these don't work in the presses, so just keep that in mind. It is an additional cost. In addition to that, you're also going to need a small tool. That's the way that you can inspect the primer hole. A set of calipers. Also, wouldn't hurt to pick up one of these Lee bench plates. I really like these. I've got a couple of these, and I've got different presses that I can just slap on the bench here. Pretty easy, just a couple screws on and off. When you get this set up, you're ready to start priming. Basically just slap that bad boy on there and you're ready to go. So to go ahead and get the press into action, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our primer itself and make sure we get that oriented the right way. Yep. Now obviously this portion here needs to be up. All right. Then all you're going to do is you're going to take your plate, slide that in there. Check that. Actuates pretty good. All right, next you want to take your primer holder and you want to go ahead and open it up. We already have some primers in here now, but you're just going to dump them in here now. It's good not to touch the primers because your oils off your fingers can actually contaminate them. So typically what I'll do is, you know what, I'm just going to get one. We'll just fill it up. Okay, so I got another box of primers. Using these CCI small rifle primers, number 400s. These are really good primers. Best way to do that, let me get this out of my way, is if you just open this thing up, and what I like to do is flip it to where it's upside down, and then you just kind of open it up and just pull it slowly across. And what it's doing is just kind of dumping them right in there, okay? And what you're trying to do is you're attempting not to touch them, okay? And it'll be a mess, so that's okay. Just give it a little shake. All right, and a little shake, rattle, and roll. And eventually they'll all turn the same direction unless you're filming a YouTube video. Okay, just like that. Once you get them there, drop it, and so that way you can do it again. All right. Once you get it there, just go ahead and set it down, and you're going to make sure that you get it locked. Now, I will tell you that one thing I don't like about this is locking mechanism on this thing can be a little tricky. You got three positions here. Yep, see, not quite there. You got 3 positions there. You got on, lock, and open. When you go to handle this, obviously you want this in the lock position. And you would think it would be right here, but it's not, because when I do that, it's going to open it up and let primers go through. It's too close to on. So you just got to find the sweet spot. You know, it's possible that mine just may be a little bit defective, but that's where you want it. It will really piss you off when you don't get that thing right, you don't check it, and you dump primers everywhere. It's happened to me before. So what I typically like to do is I lock it, I'll kind of hold my thumb down here, and I'll give it a little shake and make sure nothing's coming out. All right, so once you get it in there, then all you got to do is just seat it, and you're ready to go. Now that we got it seated, we're going to go ahead and flip it up to the on position and give a little jiggle, and you'll see the primers will fall right down in here. Once you do that, just give it a little flip, and that will load the first primer in. As you know it, I would actually flip the first primer. All right, so once you got that ready to go, next thing you do, you're ready to start priming your brass. Having a small tool or something to just kind of check inside that primer pocket is important. I tumbled this brass with walnut media, and walnut media tends to stick in the primer hole. So you got to make sure that you're visually inspecting that so you don't have any debris stuck inside there. Just drop it on there and give it a little press, and you'll feel it seat. You don't want to give it so much pressure that you crush the primer, but once you feel it stop, you can go ahead and release it and pull it right off. Typically what I like to do is just give a little feel, rub my thumb across it, maybe my nail, to see if it's seated all the way. And then also you can inspect it with your calipers, see and check your seating depth. Okay, so that's 7/1000 of an inch, which is really good. So again, just like that. Okay. So not too hard. As you can see, I gotta check my primer first. As you can see, it's a fairly simple operation. When I first started reloading 223, I actually bought a Lee Loadmaster press. Okay? Anybody that's ever used a Lee Loadmaster press will tell you that it's a finicky piece of equipment. And one of the problems that the Lee Loadmaster press has is in order to use the priming function of the press, when you actually bring the ram down to, if you're charging and seating a bullet and all that, you're actually priming the cartridge as well. It's just one of the steps on the same pull. Other presses like Hornady and Dillon is you have a backstroke that you actually push forward and you can fill that primer seat. A much better system, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, the Lee Loadmaster was not developed that way. A couple problems that you run into when you're priming on a press, it is equipment specific. So any guys that may have that routine down, you've been doing it a while, it really doesn't, it's not going to affect you. But as you can see, I'm inspecting every one of these cases as I prime them. And the reason why I want to do that, and I've had the problem where I've run it on a press and I don't even know it, primers are flipping. And as I'm going along, I start looking and I see, oh man, I've got a couple cases where the primers are flipped over, they're crushed, maybe they're not seated all the way. There's some issue, and particularly with 223, is if you don't chamfer this backside, which is very important in your process, if you don't chamfer this and swage the primer pocket, a lot of times that primer, when it goes to seat, it's going to catch the edge and it's going to shave off a little piece of brass. And that little brass shaving looks kind of like a fingernail, and it can get caught up in your firearm. It's just more debris, stuff that you really just don't want in your rifle. Okay, so by doing this, I can feel it, which is another advantage of doing this versus some of the priming mechanisms that are on the presses. It's hard to really get a feel for that primer seating. It shouldn't feel extraordinarily tough. It shouldn't feel like it's binding. You're going to know, like that one right there, that felt extraordinarily loose. And this brass is some of my older brass. It's on its last leg. So this guy, yeah, so I'm actually able to move this primer, and that was really perfect timing. So let's see here. I'm going to actually seat this guy. Okay, so we're about 1/1000th of an inch, maybe just flush. I bet it doesn't move. I can feel it. It's protruding. after I do that, I'm probably going to push it right. Yeah, I felt it move. It's showing 3 now. But I can definitely feel when that one went in, there was literally no resistance. It just kind of fell in there. So I'm going to call this guy bad. And I don't have my crap bucket. Let me grab my crap bucket. So we've got a little bucket. If you got bad ones, he's reached the end of his life, because what will happen is you'll get a pop primer with that when it fires. It's going to blow the primer out of the back of the shell into your firearm. It's not something you want. So one of the problems that you run into when you're loading 223 specifically on a setup like that is you can't really feel the primer bind. So if it gets flipped, which in that press, it just does, okay? You're gonna flip primers and you're not gonna know it. And unfortunately with any press system, when you're loading that way, that's typical, because you can't inspect, as I did. Here you can see a little piece of walnut stuck in there. So you can't inspect to make sure that everything's good to go. Number one, clear. Obviously you can inspect it before you load the press. But two, you can't really visually inspect on the go to ensure that that primer is fully seated and it's not in there all jacked up and you have some problems. So this is why I like to prime, honestly, as a separate application. With this setup here, it takes no time to do this. It'll take me, if I wasn't running my mouth right now, and I was just focused completely on doing this, I could probably get 400 or 500 rounds done in maybe 30 to 40 minutes, maybe an hour. Now, obviously, running the walnut media through here does add a step, just because I'm having to check that. But I will tell you, it's not really all that big a deal. The thing that you want to keep in mind is priming is a very important step of the reloading process. And if you have a poor priming job, you're going to run into accuracy problems and all kinds of nonsense going on, especially if the primer is not fully seated. The firing pin can actually, when it strikes the primer, can finish seating the primer itself into the cartridge, and you will have a failure to fire or a light primer strike. And then when you run that case back through again, it will detonate on the second shot. That's usually because it wasn't fully seated. You also want to make sure that it's not interfering with the mechanisms of the press. So as I mentioned, the lead Loadmaster does all in the same stroke. If that primer binds, that means you're not going to seat that bullet at the same depth, because the primer will be stopping the press from fully seating that bullet, if that makes sense. So just not a fan of that. Now, as I mentioned before, I've not used some of the other systems. I'm sure they work really good, but I will tell you, if you're new to reloading, or if you've been doing it a while, or if you just really want to be sure that you got good quality and everything has been fully inspected, this really is the best process. So in my reloading, specifically for rifle cases, and 223 obviously being part of that, is I do the priming as its own separate activity. So I consider brass processing its own part of the operation. The next step would be priming, and then at that point I've got primed, cleaned, processed brass ready to be loaded. Anyway, pretty simple. Like I said, not a bad operation. And I failed to mention or talk about prepping the brass specifically for priming, but two basic things for 223 that you're really going to want to do, especially if you're using any kind of mil-spec brass, Lake City brass, 556 brass, is you're going to want to first, you're going to chamfer the outside of this edge here and just hit it with the chamfer tool, or any tool that you might have. Just take the edge right off of here. The next thing you're going to do is go ahead and swage it. Now you could just swage it, but I found that if I chamfer it and then swage it, it makes the swaging process a little bit easier. It also helps seat that primer in there straight, so you don't flip it. What happened, one of the problems that you run into with a lot of the 223 brass I mentioned is they'll crimp this primer pocket, and that does create a little ridge, and the primer itself is square and this edge is square, and they don't want to quite line up, and they could be a mother to get those things in there if you've not swaged them or at least chamfered. Sometimes you can just chamfer the edge and you can get those in there, but it's better off if you do once. Now you only have to really do that one time in the life of the brass when you're conditioning it. But these are very, very important steps, and it'll make your life extraordinarily easier when you're doing this priming process. All right, well, that's about it. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment below, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. I appreciate you watching the video. 4-2 out.